us know who the order in which will speak, and if you do, if you'd like to announce them, what your preferred pronouns would be, although similarly, no pressure either way. So starting with OG.
I will start, and Eric Lalou, no problem.
So Santiago first?
No, first Eric Lalou.
Okay, and then Santiago.
Yeah.
For Alo?
I'm Christina, I will be first, and Thomas.
I'm Thomas. I have no preference.
Great. CG?
Lisa speaking first, I'm just being secretary of reference.
Thank you. And lastly, Lucas. Great. For the round, I'm going to use the time kept app. Let me just make sure that the sound is audible for everyone, especially that the window's open. And both, especially the upper benches, can you hear that fine? Worst case scenario, if it gets to the point where you can't hear it, just let me know and I'll switch to clapping during the debate. Judges, are you ready?
Yeah, I just want to make one request. Everyone speaks loudly so we can hear this all.
Yeah, this is good. Great? Great. All right. Well, thank you very much to everyone. Let's get round 2 on the road. It is my pleasure to invite the Prime Minister to open up this debate. Here.
Okay, so to start my turn, I would like to characterize the government of China, the system of one country, two systems, and why it's not in the interest of China to break this system of one country, two systems. So firstly, let's see at how China works and how the People's Communist Party of China really works. So what are their main interests? Well, I think we pretty much think that their interest mainly is to retain power and bring the stability to China. So how do they maintain this power, and how have they done this for so long? So mainly it's they have an agreement with their people. They say, okay, you don't have as much liberties, but we provide for you a system in which you can grow economically, you have greater chances of success, and you have in an independent way because of this system. They have great autonomy, and they have a greater degree of democracy than mainland China. So Hong Kong has great economics and great business, and has been doing so because of their history, and they have served as a role model for the inner China to develop their businesses, as they have learned about how capitalism works with this system. So the problem is that Hong Kong it's really interesting to invest in Hong Kong, and they have great infrastructure. So if the CCP enters there, it creates instability, and that draws foreign investment from the city, because it is working well now, but you don't know how it is going to work when the status quo is broken. Presumably it will work fine, but you never know, and so you have a deterrence to invest in it. And so this is our first point. And then, if you really gain control of Hong Kong as China, you are creating a huge problem for you and for the companies that are based in Hong Kong, because as we have seen, there is a lack of trust in the CCP and the businesses that are located in China, such as we see with Huawei. It would be better for them, and they would be economically sounder if, for example, the USA wouldn't have wouldn't have had this trade war, and so Huawei would be not forced to not cooperate with the USA. And so we see how the companies that are based in Hong Kong would have a greater they would have much more difficulties to function as they function, and so their economic growth would be would be diminished. And so, but then we go to a social aspect of Hong Kong. Hong Kong, obviously, its people are used to their liberties and to democracy. And so when you see interference in it, you're going to protest, you're going to have mobilizations. And so there is instability in the region, and there is really a problem here, because there are two outcomes possible. Either probably they are squandered, and like China successes in eliminating Hong Kong as we know it and becomes part of mainland China, or something similar, like they take liberties from them. Or either Hong Kong, it's unlikely, but the Hong Kong people succeed and China retracts from its policies. So what we see here, if China retracts from its policies, we see a weakness in China. We see that China hasn't been able to impose its will. And so it creates a narrative for people in mainland China. It questions its authority and its greater power in all. And so it creates an instability for the CCP. And then, if they succeed, well, we are back to our first argument. We see that they gain control of the region, they gain control, they can impose their interests in the companies of Hong Kong, and then there is a distrust in the companies that are based in Hong Kong, and so there is a lack of revenue of FDI for these companies, and so we see that their economy is diminished. And so we have, after that, we have a third argument that is that will be more further developed by Santiago, but that is about the importance of soft power for China and how geostrategically this is not viable for them, because like they have stability in the region. You know, like as China, you know that you are going to gain control of Hong Kong, and the two system, one country has a due date, like 100 years, and so you know that you are going to gain control. You don't you aren't in a hurry to do this. You should be patient and not create instability in the region, and also it could severely harm other projects as the One Belt One Road or the control of the South China Sea and the stability in all the region, because it creates a distrust in how China controls its agreements, and how they don't see always for only the betterment of the economy, but they try to force some things in their interest, in their political interest. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much to the Prime Minister, and I would like to invite the Leader of Opposition to open the debate for the opposition. Here.
Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to speak with in my speech is about how actually China works, in which case it's more likely that the CPC could keep its power, and also like what it will bring us in the long term. So first of all, let's take a look on how actually China works now. So as the government has mentioned, there was this kind of deal, expectation that there would be one country, two systems, where Hong Kong would have its certain independence. We believe that in Hong Kong there is a certain independence, but as the motion even says, that the CPC is now infringing it. By which kind of means actually infringing it? So let's take a look. Actually, they are controlling the spread of ideas, which could possibly be seen, like an example when, thanks to the influence of China, there was closed a bookshop in which there were books that were against the CPC or the ideas of communism. And also the CPC now has a certain influence on who will rule and speak to the public, as they have certain influence on the voters itself. And why we think that this current status quo is actually good for the CPC itself. So, as has the side of government mentioned, and we agree with this, what the CPC wants is to have control over the country, to not have certain protests in the long term, and to retain its power and kind of spread the communism, we believe. So, how actually this could be got. So, we believe that in a short term there may be certain protests against the fact that there is not the independence that was promised by the one country, two systems, because the CPC is entering this independence territory. But in long term, we believe this could change, because if now the CPC would get out of the Hong Kong and would give them the freedom that they may expect from this one protest, they could not retain its power back after that. How so? No, thank you. By the side of government, we have heard that if the China enters the Hong Kong even more, it will create even more instability and the deterrence to invest in Hong Kong. We believe this may be bad to Hong Kong itself, but the question is not be different, because as we have said, the CPC wants to retain the power, while Hong Kong maybe wants to have a certain growth in its city. We believe this is not really what the CPC may want, because the growth in Hong Kong may actually bring it more independence than the CPC would like, because it would have more investment from the Western countries. The influences as the companies would move there would grow in a second. But if they are not growing, if the investment is not, and the influence of the Western countries is not coming there, it also means that there is more floor for the CPC. Go.
Hong Kong has always been the main economic powerhouse of China, and has also significantly contributed to the CPC's budget via taxes. Why would it be a specific threat now?
Why would it be a specific threat? Well, because as you are saying, now it's kind of like we are on a really narrow world in which the Hong Kong either will fall to the CPC or it will fall to the Western countries, we believe. Because either way, the CPC will get rid of its influence and the Hong Kong will retain the independence at once. And in that case, we believe that the CPC could no longer actually retain its power there and spread the power and anything can it fall for the Western side. Or it retains its power and it can be made by their case, but only if there are no influences of the Western and the China is the only one who has the floor and the only one who can control it. And it can be sustained only in the case where actually they can control which ideas will be spread, who will be actually speaking to the voters, who will be in power, and so on. So, What we also have heard by the side of government is that there are certain social liberties that Hong Kongers were used to, and that they will actually protest is under this intervention. We believe yes, they will protest for sure. But the thing is, if under this certain one protest, the CPC would give up and just say, okay, let's you have whatever you want, the Hong Kongers would get used to actually getting what they want. And we believe that this is something that CPC doesn't want. They want to have it under the control. And the only way how to sustain the control is actually showing the Hong Kongers that even though you may not like this, the policy that we are trying to prove, the policy that we are trying to put on you, we will still put it on you. Maybe we will make like these small, like giving you place in some small ideas, like some things you want, but the main rule should be still followed by the way that we want. So, I believe that I have shown you that in the short term there will be protests and there will possibly the Hong Kong may actually get worse in the economic growth, but this is not what actually would scare the CCP, and we believe it's not making them lose their control in any kind of way. We believe that in long term, actually, there is only one possibility that Hong Kong will fall either way to the western part or to China, and in the interest of CPC is to retain it retains its power, and maybe in the longer term, actually, to have one country, one system, and it cannot be held to if they actually give the whole independence to Hong Kong as it may wish. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the leader of the opposition. Now we'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue this debate. Here,
Okay, from the government, we think that we should, as in the interest of the Communist Party, we should seize these attempts on infringe the one country, two systems based on three arguments. The first of all is about investing, the second one is like a social argument, and the last one is the one that my partner mentioned, the soft power versus the hard power. First of all, talking about investing. If you are a huge bank or a huge investor, a huge whatever, and you have thousands of millions of dollars, of euros, of whatever kind of money you want to invest, one thing you want is stability. You want to know that if you are going to put a lot of money in one country, in one business, in one company, or in whatever, that that money is going to be there or is going to have not a huge potential of growing, but at least it's going to keep the same but not reduce. So what we need is stability. As my partner have said, a demonstration in China or in Hong Kong in this case would mean a lack of stability, and also, as he mentioned, the Huawei scenario would be a lack of trust. Right? The problem with Huawei was that it has ingerencies of the China's Communist Party, and so of that, Trump, in this case United States, does not trust the company, and they started a trade war. That doesn't happen right now in Hong Kong, but if the government take control of Hong Kong and they break this two systems model, they are gonna also have this lack of trust in more companies than just the ones located in the mainland. Yes, or?
Right. So actually, I believe there was that Trump after said that the Huawei is okay for them. So what actually happened? Why he claimed that? Maybe that there's no problem with it with the trust as you are trying to prove.
What we are saying is that the problem with companies that are located in the mainland of China, such as Huawei, they have the government has the possibility to control them and to make inherencies on them, so that other countries, as in this case happened with United States, would have a lack of trust on them. That doesn't happen right now in the Hong Kong companies, and if you take control of Hong Kong, it's gonna happen. The second thing that we want to talk is about the social stability and the social. That is that in the situation when people has liberties and when they have political rights, when they have freedom, it's very, very, very difficult to take them that liberties and that freedom, because for example, why in North Korea people don't do demonstrations? Because they don't know anything apart from what they are living. But the problem here is that they are living freedom, and if you are reducing their rights instead of increasing them, and they are gonna do a demonstration. And what happens if the demonstration take place? Two scenarios are possible. If the government loses, it's gonna show weakness, and probably other parts of the mainland they are gonna follow their model of Hong Kong, and they are gonna continue and try to, as the government shows their weakness, they are gonna try to take freedom for themselves. Also, another possibility is that the government wins. In this case, there would continue obviously an internal resistance, and they will show a bad image for the international community, because it's going to be a demonstration of force. And in both scenarios, while the demonstration is taking place, there is going to be an instability, because there is people is in the street, there are riots, there are different problems, and that takes us to the first argument, that is instability and no investment. And then the last thing we want to talk about is the soft power versus hard power. Right now, maybe the last century, the international scenario was like showing who was the most strengthened, who has the more military, who was invading the Middle East, or the scenarios, or in Asia. The international criteria was who was the strength, who has the strength. But right now, this power, as my partner mentioned, is more based on the program of China, the One Belt, One Road, that is to try to connect a lot of countries in the surroundings of China by one road, and make economic treatments between them instead of trying to invade. The problem here is that the South China Sea and all that area right now, they are for the Communist Party, they have let's say some stability. But if they make a ingerence in Hong Kong, they are gonna give, apart from a bad image for the international community, they are gonna give an excuse for other countries, for third countries, to say, okay, they are violating freedom, they are violating political rights, so we have to act, and that's gonna create an instability that is not likely for the Communist Party. Your point?
If now the internationals, international are not really against the fact that China is infringing the rights, why would they, after they are actually against the protests, anything would change?
Because as I said before, it's not the same. They are continuing one pattern, but in the mainland of China, they have work like that all the time, and they have the power. But in Hong Kong, all the people, they have lived from another way, and it's taking them out something that they had already. But what we want to say is that right now, what is more likely is the soft power, and it's more likely for the Communist Party to maintain Hong Kong as it is. So it's like a door for the Western countries. It's like a more likely place to have treatments, to have conversations, that instead of making a huge to put it in the China's mainland. And also because as the treaty of one country, two systems has a date of expiration, and once that happens, you would have also the internal pressure, but the external pressure from the international community wouldn't be that much, because right now the problem is that you are violating an international treaty, and apart from that you are taking people's freedom right. But in I don't know how many years, but it's less than 100 years, you will have you will be violating the freedom, but not the international treaty, so the international community would not be so against your actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the DPM. Now I'd like to invite the Yale Law to continue the debate and finish up the top half of the speeches. Here.
We agree with the first government that this debate is about stability, and this is what the Chinese Communist Party wants. And we also agree with the side of government that the way to stability is power. In this debate, I will show you what happens now under current circumstances, and I will provide you a prediction with a relation to this value of this debate, which is stability, and then I will compare it with their world, what will change if Chinese Communist Party would stop infringing into Hong Kong. So let's talk about the current, what happens now. We think, firstly, let's do what we've heard from first government is for stability currently of China. What is now most important for the Chinese Communist Party is economic growth. We disagree. Well, we disagree that the Hong Kong plays such a crucial economic role, because what we could see in the current status quo is that the Chinese other cities grown exponentially. Therefore, all the GDP of Hong Kong is just, I think, under 5% of the whole GDP of China. So even if all the businesses in their worst case scenario would disappear in Hong Kong, it would still provide China with enough economic growth and enough GDP. It's just a small drop in the ocean in economic terms, the Hong Kong in the China Sea. What we say, so this is why we disagree with this importance of economic for stability. What we on contrary say is that what happens currently, and what already Christina said, is that it's not about economy, it's about words and about ideology. We think that the thing that the Chinese Communist Party is most afraid of is dissent. And this, in current status quo, is very able to suppress by various means. Firstly, for instance, let's take how it can. Currently, it stops spreading dangerous ideas from Hong Kong. As we could see from the example, how on the main street there was an enormous bookshop that sold books that you couldn't buy in mainland China, and the shop suddenly disappeared. This was because the China has its power, though it's against the system, like one party, two systems. Still, because it has power, the shop suddenly disappeared, and also the owners suddenly disappeared. First, this enables the Chinese to spread the dangerous idea to the mainland city that someone smuggles the books. But more importantly, it stops Hong Kong as a hub of dissent. Because if this happens in Hong Kong, it stops the people. It makes people more afraid to prepare any activities against which are not in accordance with the ideology of Chinese Communist Party. So first, what is happening in current status quo is this ability to stop this spreading of dangerous ideas, which is much more important than spreading than the economic point. For instance, because yes, I will take it now.
Okay, so would you agree that the One Belt One Road project is at its heart the growth of China? And if you're a partner that you are going to trade with China, if you see this, you are going to react negatively, and you're going to accept it relentlessly? Just in the comparison, even this is a small point because I already shown you that it's just a drop in the ocean. Let's give a prediction as what would happen. It's not that just currently China has the ability to stop this spreading of ideas, but also if we see a prediction, first what will not happen is that the companies will run away. What is very likely is that these protests, as we already see, they are weakening. So China said, okay, now we did that was a bit too much. We don't want protests. So they shelved the idea that they were protesting against the law they were protesting against. So we think it will calm down, and so nobody will be running away. But what is so this economic threat to Hong Kong is not large. But what we say to you is that there are much bigger threats, because what is the most threatening to
Chinese government. And what we saw, for instance, in Yugoslavia, is your biggest problem is if you have an ideology that spans all that claims we provide something to you that is the exclusive, that is the best. You have two problems. First, it creates a problem if you have some distinct group that have a distinct identity, which will not happen currently, because they have first Chinese have the power currently to the Hong Kong is not a democracy. They have a power. Chinese government has a power to elect has the power to influence the elections. Therefore, they can influence what is the narrative of the leaders. Leaders influence hugely the narrative that is given, and therefore they can change it to a way that there would not be a separatistic tendency that's strong. And second, for instance, what you can see now is because of the Chinese influence is the kids that are taught in school, they are taught Mandarin, and they are taught something that is useful for the Chinese ideology, and therefore they can influence and they can stop this ideology of separatism. Because that would be problem. It's not 100 years, it's 50 years, and like more than 20 years are already off. Because what could happen in 30 years if these people with distinct identity, which you cannot influence that much, as we could see in Yugoslavia. So first you have less power, which is and secondly, you have less stability, because not that you cannot just influence the power, but it influences the very notion of your I am the best for you people, because there are people that are currently believing in something else, and they rather prefer to stay alone, which attacks your notion of we are the best, everyone wants to be like China. So what I have shown you, is that the economy is not that important. What you should care about is the descent and is the long-term separatistic tendencies that could infringe the power and domination and stability of the Chinese Communist Party. And if they stop, they would. We showed you that it's not just about demonstrations, but there are like 7 different ways in which the Chinese Democratic Party Communist Party is using their power that are currently stopping this something that can attack their stability. Therefore, I beg you to oppose.
Thank you very much to the member. Thank you very much to the DLO. Now we'd like to invite the member of government to open up to the back half debate. Here.
Okay. First, some real-world framing. 1. What is one country, two systems? Hong Kong was a British protectorate since the middle 19th century and remained under a completely separate political system until the late 90s, when it was given back to China under the promise that the legal system would remain separate. How does that look like in practice? It means that Hong Kong citizens have stronger protections for things such as freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. It also means that in contrast to the entire rest of the country, they can actually elect their local representatives. That is the main difference in one country, two system. Secondly, what are the infringements that we are actually talking about? We are not talking about some random bookshop being closed. We are talking about the things that have been happening over the last couple of months after China or / the government of Hong Kong announced a legal change which would make it possible for people who are convicted of a crime by a Chinese court to be extradited from Hong Kong to mainland China. This is the only active step that has been taken by the Chinese government into the direction of infringing so far. And it has sparked massive protests that have, no thanks, been going on over, I think, at least 8 weeks by now, which I think already crushes the idea of, there will be protests in the short term. No, there have been ongoing protests for weeks, with more and more people joining them when the Hong Kong government did not immediately cave into people's demands as much as they wanted. Okay, now on to our case. So we think that the idea of eliminating Hong Kong as a source of dissent is the reason why the Chinese government would maybe do that. But in my case, I'm going to explain to you why that is very, very unlikely to work, has the very likely risk outcome of getting the Hong Kong government out there, which is currently pro-China, and has the somewhat smaller but still substantial risk of the protests actually spreading to mainland China. Whereas on the other side, we believe that given the Chinese government's current other strategies of the social security system, will already be able to eliminate much of the dissent in Hong Kong in the future. Okay, so one, why do we think there is a risk involved to the Chinese Communist Party in general? So the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy doesn't only rest on economic benefits, but also on the idea of the people that this is a government that actually can care for my basic security and defends my interests unless I specifically dissent against that. This is why most people in China are fine with harsh cracking down on government protesters and not being able to vote, because they believe that their government can ensure their property rights and security if they're a good citizen otherwise. Now, the problem is with what happened in Hong Kong is that after the protests became somewhat more intense, the government in Hong Kong started to pay criminals to beat up the protesters. They thought they could do this in secret. It did not work. There was video footage giving evidence for that spread, and that basically took the protest to a new level and even caused some concern in the rest of China. Because in contrast to things that might be happening with Taiwan or massive problems with Tiananmen Square in the past, it is hard for this part of information to not reach Chinese people, because there are a lot of family ties and friendships between Hong Kong people and the rest of mainland China. So even if you try to crack down on the media, eliminate the media from spreading information about the protest, there's still enough personal connections that this information spreads. Now, what is the big problem with that? One, the Chinese Communist Party has absolutely no justification for the violence that it infringed upon protesters that were otherwise peaceful. And people in general don't like violence, especially if there's not a good reason for it. They might be okay with tolerating what their government does to Muslims in Xinjiang, but you need the justification of those people are terrorists and would otherwise hurt you. So this is why we need to crack down on them, even for people who are as loyal to their government as the Chinese. Okay, secondly, why is it bad to do this, especially right now? Basically because the Chinese are in the very beginning of constructing a very efficient and well-working surveillance system that ranges from facial recognition cameras everywhere that check what you do in public life to a online control system which is tied to the social credit system. Where basically everything that you do in favor of or against the government is recorded and opens or closes economic and otherwise opportunities for every single citizen. The thing is, they've only just started in constructing this system. Once the system is in place, the Chinese Communist Party is as good as, and people got used to it, the CCP will be as good as invincible. But if right now they've only just started doing this, so you don't want an interruption into that. Okay, so why do we think it's incredibly unlikely to work in the sense of actually incorporating Hong Kong fully? As I've already told you, the Chinese Communist Party, even pushing for one small legal change, led to protests big enough to almost oust the entire Hong Kong government, with millions of people in the street. This is because the people have literally never lived under mainland China rule. Neither have their parents or even their grandparents. Sorry, yes, last chance, quickly. You can, go.
What we showed you, that there were not just, there were many things in which China intervened and nobody cared in Hong Kong, as the textbook, as the disappearing bookshops, etc.
As I've told you, that might have been true several years ago, but at least the citizens of Hong Kong care. The citizens of mainland China do not yet care, but when they see their friends and family getting beaten up for peacefully protesting, they might start to care. And since the Chinese Communist Party isn't perfect, those protests that got steered for one thing always have run the risk of increasing and adding on to other things that the government also does wrong, of which there is definitely a lot. So you have the potential benefit of, if the protesters just decide to go home one day and let you take over Hong Kong without anything, then you might now have eliminated a dissent that already will die down once Hong Kong is incorporated into the social credit system, because no one on the individual level will want to have the negative precautions. Thirdly, you also risk getting a government out that's pro-you. Very proud to propose.
Alright, thank you very much to the member of government. I would like to call up the member of opposition to go up and continue this debate here.
Middle Kingdom. This term was used historically to denote China, to be a very strong kingdom in the middle of the world. And we totally agree with the opening government in the goal that Chinese government has, that is to retain power and stability. And I will explain why right now intervening is the perfect time, and why everything else would just be not in favor of the Chinese government. I'm very glad that Lisa finally mentioned the riots. I was asking myself why nobody mentioned them, but now that they are in the debate, I'd like to say something about the riots. There are riots in Hong Kong, very violent riots for a very long amount of time already, and there is the really realistic risk of the riots spreading to mainland China. Why is that? So naturally, there is a lot of exchange between Hong Kong and China, and also, of course, when there's exchange of goods, for example, then also there's exchange of ideas, and the people in mainland China will compare their personal situation to the situation in Hong Kong, and then they'll see that Hong Kong has a lot of freedoms, has much more liberties, better justice systems from the viewpoint of liberty, and then they see that in mainland China, the China citizen score that Lisa also mentioned is being implemented, and along with that, a very large surveillance system across China. Yes?
As I mentioned, Hong Kong is going to be, and already is, part of the social credit system, which is one of the reasons why the dissent in Hong Kong is likely to die down anyway.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and this is exactly why I say we have to cut down the protest by force. We just have to project strength now in this situation, because in order to retain power and stability, we need to project strength, and give an example to the rest of China what happens when you oppose Chinese government. And these riots that have been happening for way too long must finally stop. Not acting on these riots in Hong Kong more decisively encouraged other incontent people in mainland China to actually start their own riots and making the whole system unstable. Unstable.
So the Tiananmen Square protests were a great deal for China, and they have tried to cover it up. Why then would they do it again and create this problem
I'm
again?
not suggesting to cover it up. I'm just suggesting to marching in Hong Kong and just cutting down the protest, to incorporate it into China, and to take all the liberal, the whole liberal system that there is, and just having one system, and that is the system that is in mainland China. Also, in the implementation of the China citizen score, Lisa said there would be some kind of interruption or something, but I say it's the perfect time now to implement it and to have it wholly implemented also in Hong Kong, rather than just implementing it in China and then maybe later having to implement it in Hong Kong again. So this will be much more effective and then will also help to suppress Hong Kong. And then there was this, there's this other point, and this is about economics. It has been said that investments that investments from foreign Western countries will cease. But I say, even if it might there might be less investments into China, China has already grown strong enough to provide own funds to invest in its own economy, and we have seen that China and China's government has been very successful in building various industries and, for example, fostering research in very new technologies such as artificial intelligence, and having a lot of investments that have been very successful. So we are not required to have these foreign investments, for one thing. And also, I do not believe that investments would stop. Why is that? That is because right now, in this situation, we have 0 interest rates along the European Union and very low interest rates in Japan. We have very low interest rates in the United States. And government bonds sometimes even have negative interest rates. So for investors, and for large-scale investors, have to find other ways to invest their money. And China is still a very attractive market because there is still so much growth. There are hardly any more attractive regions in the world. And if we take over Hong Kong, then the investments would not stop because the investors would be forced to participate on that growth that is in China, and therefore would they would keep investing, and they might not be only restricted to Hong Kong, but might then also invest in other parts of China, because the special advantages of Hong Kong are not there anymore. So this will be better for mainland China, because other regions might receive investments from the outside as well. And also, if you take over, or if the Chinese government takes over Hong Kong, we can utilize the economic power that is there, no matter how much, like 5%. That's already, that's something that we can incorporate, or that China can incorporate and take an advantage and control of. And this is why I say controlling Hong Kong means controlling a constant nuisance, like a mosquito that is first in the room and then stings you and itches you. Just slap the mosquito and stop the nuisance. Thanks.
Alright, thank you very much to the member of opposition. Now we'd like to invite the government whip to close out the government side of this debate. Hear, hear.
Okay, so I think everyone in this debate kind of agreed on the fact that it is mostly in the Communist Party's interest to keep the people of China happy. I think that is not really a point of clash. I think the main thing that we're all discussing about is how to keep the people of China happy, or maybe not so much happy as much as quiet. Now, I think that where we differ significantly from OG is that we actually talk about a larger social movement that may come forward from these protests, which I'll go into in a second, whereas OG mostly talks about the economic efforts. I think that economy is indeed a very, very important thing for the Chinese Communist Party, but I think that at the moment that you have a small economic powerhouse being taken out, being taken out of international FDI, whereas it also contains a lot of Chinese companies rather than foreign companies, and the Chinese market is still so huge that probably very few countries will actually stop trading with it. They already don't in China. China does quite horrific things to minorities in status quo, and still people are trading with them. So, I think at that moment, the economic harm that would come from harming Hong Kong in the way that they describe, although probably real, is not does not stand up to what we actually talk about, because what we talk about is a larger movement that comes through China. Because there's a thing that the Chinese government does, which is actually much more important than providing growth, which is saying, look, we're good for you, right? And I think that that's partly economic, but it's also partly just the overarching feeling of safety, of being taken care of, and of being, as long as I'm a good citizen, I will get prosperity, I will get safety, and I will be treated fairly by my government. And I think that is the thing that keeps China, the Chinese citizens, in the social contract that OG talks about. Now, I think that a lot of people talk a lot about Hong Kong in this debate. Great, but people kind of forget that there's also 2 billion people living in mainland China, right? And these people in mainland China, these people usually do have family in Hong Kong, right? They usually have friends that have friends in Hong Kong. They usually have been in Hong Kong at one point. And at the moment that you start cracking down on Hong Kong in the way that Lisa described, because everyone in this debate kind of forgets that there's already protests going on, and not as CO tried to say for decades and decades. I'll get into that later. But in the past couple of months, since China explicitly started interfering in the one state, two systems where right of assembly and right of free speech is protected and are being cracked down upon, what you see as a mainland Chinese person is I have an aunt there, I have a niece there, I've been on a holiday there, and there, Chinese citizens that are doing something that is within the law, that is doing something that is within the right, are being cracked down on for no particular reason, because they're doing so with help of thugs, right? With help of people that really shouldn't be involved in government things. At the moment that I see this as a Chinese citizen, I am rather likely to be more skeptical. And I think that even though this is probably not going to be the end of the Communist Party at the moment that people get more skeptical, skepsis is something that the Chinese Party really, really can't handle very well. And any form of skepsis is probably a very, very big harm. This is why they took the credit system, right? At the moment that this kind of skepsis starts spreading, and that this kind of, oh God, my friends are not being taken care of even though they are being good citizens, start spreading, you may also start wondering what the hell the Chinese government is monitoring when they're monitoring when they're monitoring your social behavior, when they're starting to count your social credits. The entire Chinese system is based on the fact that their citizens don't ask questions. At the moment that you start doing things that are explicitly against what you've always promised them, what they do is starting to ask questions. That is something that the Communist Party really doesn't want opening.
Alright, so when the Supreme Court of Mainland China took a case from the High Court of Hong Kong, it was not such an infringing of one country, two systems. So this case, which is happening now, you are saying is the first one when the Mainland China is infringing.
I think it's the first one when they're significant, infringing significant enough to cause protests. I think that at the moment that you're infringing so significantly that you're causing protests, it is the first significant infringement, even though they may have closed the bookshop in the past. Okay, now. And that's also kind of where OO comes in, right? I think OO actually has a really lovely case where they mostly talk about how ideology is the thing that keeps China together, which I guess strengthens our case as well. But then what they start telling us is that at the moment that we leave Hong Kong be, Hong Kong is going to spread their ideology to mainland China, and we really can't deal with that, because at the moment that they start oozing their westernness on top of us, we start questioning our morals. I think that directly clashes with Lisa's arguments, because Lisa shows us how at the moment that you're going to mistreat people for nothing, you're actually starting questioning morals way more than what OO thinks, what OO says. But to strengthen that further, I'm going to give you a couple more reasons, because first of all, probably anti-communist propaganda is illegal in China. I don't know much about Chinese law, but I have a feeling that in mainland China you can't spread anti-communist propaganda, which means that there's a very, very small public that actually receives like the anti-communist sentiments that they talk about and the spread of ideology. Secondly, as Lisa actually points out really, really nicely, the social credit system is a thing. And it is a thing that, opposing to what closing opposition thinks, is actually going to be implemented in Hong Kong as well and in mainland China, right? Which means that in both of these places, you're going to actually make engaging with these kinds of policy not necessarily something that these kinds of propaganda and these kinds of anti-communist sentiments, not necessarily something that is illegal, not necessarily something that you're going to get cracked down upon, but something that's going to give you negative credit, social credit imbalance. And a negative social credit imbalance is like a really, really tricky thing, because on the one hand, it's not necessarily something very violent. On the other hand, you probably, at the moment that your balance becomes too low, won't be allowed to take the bus anymore. Like, and the fun thing is also that the people around you are also affected, right? Like, talking to a person with a low social credit score already lowers your social credits, which means that it is an incredibly, incredibly efficient system, which is like a magnificent wonder of technology, holy shit, of monitoring people's thoughts, monitoring people's behavior, making sure they, are doing what you want them to do, right? So, at that moment, I think that we can, I think building such a big infrastructural project is still going to take a couple of years, and I think in those couple of years we don't want to antagonize Hong Kong too much. That's something that Lisa already told you. At the moment that we antagonize Hong Kong too much, first of all, they're already demanding like the government being shut down for like a minor infringement of the Hong Kong law, right? Like, I think that at the moment that we're going to get probably a less favorable government, they're more likely to resist against the system. B, at the moment that the Hong Kong population is already protesting against the Chinese government and what they're doing, they're also way less likely to accept something like social credit system. At the moment that the social credit system is just built over time and it's going to go into their lives over time, and it's something also legal, right? Because it's not necessarily legal to push against their right of speech. It is legal to implement Chinese law there. Okay. So that's what I think, right? I think that Hong Kong may be scary, but I think opposite to what closing opposition thinks, it's not going to get any more scary than it was 20 years ago. It's a minor threat, and we can eliminate that minor threat, as Lisa has explained to you, but we have to wait to eliminate that, and we don't have to antagonize them in the meantime, which means that we have to let them go for now. Thank you, very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you to the government whip, and now we'd like to invite the opposition whip to close out round 2 of Euros 2019. Here, here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have a question. This session is filmed, right? So I put myself in the role of CCP Chinese tyrant interest. So I wouldn't be